Turn in your Bibles to Ephesians 6, verse 10. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So remember that, in the heavenly realms. That's going to be important in just a minute. "Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand," that means actually you're going to be the last man or woman standing. Who wants to be the last man standing? All day long. All day long. And it says, "Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist and the breastplate of righteousness in place." Now, those were the two that Pastor Pat and Pastor Lindsay did over the last few weeks. And here's verse 15, and this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about this verse. "And with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace." With your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Today, I get to talk about the shoes. And I think that is so appropriate. It is my favorite part of the armor. Probably for a reason you might not think about, but we'll unpack that as well. But the shoes are the best. They are the best. I wore my favorite shoes today. They have some cheetah on them. It doesn't mean I can run fast. It just means they're comfortable. So I was looking up quotes on shoes because I thought, let's just start with a really good quote. And here's my favorite. I found it on Pinterest. It is a princess, but it says, "Cinderella is proof that one pair of shoes can change your whole life." That is something you might want to engrave somewhere. Cinderella is proof that one pair of shoes can change your whole life. And I think at the end of our time together, you're absolutely going to agree with me. Now, you might be feeling a little like Cinderella today, feeling a little cooped up. Maybe you're feeling a little overburdened, overworked, misunderstood. Maybe you're not getting along with everyone in your house. That might be understandable. Maybe you're feeling a little hidden and undiscovered. So I think that we might have a little bit of Cinderella syndrome going on, and you're kind of battling hope. And maybe you're battling a little bit of peace. And maybe you know there's just more to you than what is going on right now. Maybe you know that the place you're in is not necessarily the place that God has inspired for you to be. Hold on. There's hope. So today, as we unpack this text on spiritual shoes, I just want to talk a little bit about some background in this passage of Ephesians, and in particular, the part that says that we are battling forces in heavenly realms. And you know, Pastor Pat and Pastor Lindsay did a great job of explaining what that meant. You know, we're spiritual beings, we're in a spiritual war, and we need spiritual armor. But that part that says in heavenly realms, there was something that just, I kind of felt like I really needed to touch on. Because here's what I know. After walking with the Lord for 35 years, here's what I know. That the enemy will use our physical circumstances as a battleground for his spiritual war. Let me say that again. The enemy will often use your physical circumstances as his battleground for a spiritual war. And so though we do fight these spiritual battles, it's not just all up in this spiritual realm. There is actually a way that God can take your physical circumstances, or the enemy can take your physical circumstances, and that he can mess with you in them. He can fight his spiritual wars. And Paul is saying you need to actually be aware of this. And so here's the deal. Paul is speaking from a place where he is literally experiencing all this at the moment that he's writing. He is imprisoned. He is chained to a Roman guard. He is probably not being treated well. And he's really facing quite, as it's said in this passage, maybe a day of evil. He is really kind of facing one of the more pressurized moments of his life. And yet, he was on mission. And yet, as he looked around him, he wasn't actually going, oh, well, this is horrible, and you're treating me bad, and I don't like this, and how are you keeping me handcuffed to this guy? He was literally looking around him, and he was saying, what does this teach about Jesus? What can I learn from my current circumstances that actually will point people to Jesus? Well, here was his current circumstance. He's chained to a Roman guard who was wearing Roman garb. And so can you imagine being that guy who was chained to Paul? And can you imagine sitting on the floor with him and Paul going, nice belt. You know, the kingdom of heaven it's kind of like your belt. Can I tell you about it? And then, maybe some time goes on and he'd go, nice vest. You know the kingdom of heaven is kind of like your vest, and you could just see this guy going, oh my gosh, will you stop? And then finally he gets to the place where he goes, nice shoes. And this guard, I know this guard is in heaven just cracking up. I know these guys that had to watch him were like, hey, nice shield. Something about that shield. The kingdom of God is like that shield. Because here's what Paul had a mindset that his circumstances would teach him something about Jesus, because that's actually what Jesus did, right? No matter what circumstances he was in, it pointed to the Father. He was always saying, hey, the kingdom of heaven is like this, people. Like we're looking at a tree without fruit or whatever we're looking at. The kingdom of heaven is kind of like this. And Paul is on mission. So he's not in the greatest place of physical circumstances, but his spirit, his mind, his heart, he is anchored in a really good place. And he's really, really pointing everyone to Jesus, because he's staying on mission. Now, obviously, when we get to this part, he was considering and contemplating these Roman shoes. So what is it about these Roman shoes? Now, I did a little research, because who doesn't want to research shoes? All day long. All day long. And that's just not a woman thing, because the person I know in life who has the most shoes is not a woman. He goes to this church, and he has the most shoes. He's probably listening. And so who doesn't want to research shoes? But let's talk about these Roman shoes a little bit. So the Roman army was formidable at this time. They were the power, right? But they were known for their ability in hand-to-hand combat, and and mostly for their ability to move really, really quickly. So the enemy would go, no, the Roman army's coming, and then they would be there. And prior to this, armies didn't move that fast because they had this big, clunky armor. Can you imagine someone who was a knight, kind of, how far? Well, we're 26 miles from the enemy. Like, okay, put the thing down and keep walking, right? And so they were heavy, it was clunky, it didn't really help them move over terrain, or maybe it wasn't actually sturdy enough for the terrain that the army had to move over. But the Roman army was famous for their shoes. In fact, their shoes were called caliga, and their army was called the collegati. Their army was actually named after the shoes they wear. They were called sandaled men, sandaled warriors, right? Because they had these shoes that allowed them, that protected their feet and allowed them to have incredible mobility. And when we really think about this, what do our feet do? Feet are really important. Our feet give us stability, and they give us mobility. And the Roman shoes actually covered and protected and enhanced the soldiers' ability to be stable and to be mobile. So stability in one, because it had some very tough, like hard soles, and it had these kind of knobby things on the soles that were kind of like spikes that in hand-to-hand combat, which is what they were doing at that time when they met on the battlefield, they would dig in and they would fight. And so it made them incredibly stable. It also protected them, because sometimes what the enemy would do was they would bury these wooden stakes in the ground, and if you walked around and you got impaled in the foot, you went down. If you can't stand and if you can't be stable, then it's your last day, pretty much, in a battlefield, in a war, in a battle, in the way that they did it. And so they really had to protect their feet. And the other thing that it did was it was lighter, and it allowed them to be unhindered and undistracted, because now they're not actually worried about what am I gonna step on? Oh yeah, I gotta fight you, but wait, what am I gonna step on? So they were undistracted and unhindered. And they covered the feet, which make them mobile and stable in a way that just gave them victory after victory after victory. So the Caligati was just infamous, and to a great degree because of the shoes they wore, right? And so it made me think about this. So I almost titled this sermon today, "The Things I Learned About the Gospel Shoes from Children." So I like to tell stories. I have 3 stories I want to tell you today. I have 3 kid stories, and you know that I got to talk about my grandchildren. I mean, you don't get within 5 feet of me that you don't see their picture, because they're just, who doesn't want to look at those cute little faces? And so I got a couple stories about my grandchildren, but this part of the message, as I was studying it, it reminded me of a story a couple years back. It was a number of years. I was doing some mission work in Cambodia, and there was a day that we had to go out to the dump because there was families that were living literally in maybe a 1 square mile garbage heap. And they lived there. It was hot. It's like 105, humidity's 105,000. And they live in this dump heap that just steams because of the way that, all the garbage is in there. And they actually have the kids go out and crawl into the dump heap and dig out the bags and things, and then they give it to the women, and they actually glean their food from the garbage that sits out there. And so because of that, sometimes the children, they're getting hurt because they don't have shoes. They're obviously quite poor, and they're just running around these garbage heaps. And so we were going out. We had medical team with us, and we were going to wash feet and do some medical work on some of the cuts and things that the kids have, because one of the things that is a foot injury on a child in a world where there is no medical care is fatal. It's fatal. Especially when every day you go out and you walk in trash. And so I volunteered, because I'm not medical, so I volunteered to be the person who went door to door or tent to tent or whatever that was, and invited people and checked the kids out and talked to people. I had an interpreter and prayed for people. So I was so excited because I'm like, I can do that. I can do that. I'm not medical, but I can do that. So I get off the bus. We have masks on, and because the smell, it was hard. And so I start walking, and they told us to wear, stiff-soled shoes. And so I'm walking in my favorite running shoes, and as I'm walking, I'm sinking into the garbage. Like sinking a foot into the garbage. And I'm so distracted. So all of that zealousness about, I'm going to go door to door, I'm going to pray for people, we're going to see blind eyes, healed, you're going to see deaf kids here. We're going to do all this stuff, we're going to raise the dead, we're going to do all this stuff. And pretty soon, all I can think about is, guess what? My feet. It's touching my skin. It's like I'm sinking. What is that? Was that a piece of metal? Is that glass? Is that a bottle? And I'm so hindered, and I'm so distracted. And so eventually, I keep going, and this little kid comes up. He's a little teeny thing. He comes up, and he wants to walk with me. He's like, he's saying through the interpreter. They know a little bit of English, the kids, and can I go with you? Sure. Can you help me? Can you interpret, or can you, show me where we need to go? And I noticed that he's barefoot, and he's walking in the same thing that I'm walking in, and I'm telling you, it's a dump. It's a trash heap. And so he's walking in the same thing. He's got some cuts. He's got some stuff on his feet. It's just breaking my heart. This kid he's just the best. He's a champion. And so we get through the day. We wash all the feet. We bind up all the wounds. And we're getting ready to leave. And it was hilarious because it was awesome to watch the shoes come off. So all 30 of us left that day barefoot. And as I pulled away, I saw the little kid in my shoes. They were like 3 sizes too big for him. But I have to tell you, one pair of shoes changed his life. Because he got all of his stuff taken care of and his little Band-Aids and everything, and then he put his feet in my shoes. And then he was able to walk in them. And one pair of shoes can change your life. You'll never think of Cinderella the same. So what I learned from that little kid was that feet are important. Feet are really important, and we need to protect them. And that's what Paul is saying in this passage. He's saying, hey, people, just know feet are important. Now, as we look at this scripture, the very first part of it says that your feet should be fitted with something. In different translations, that word is shod. So have your feet shod. And I said that to my husband. He goes, what does that mean? Shod. I'm like, I love that word. So shod, I'll tell you what it means. It means to be furnished or equipped with a shoe. It also means to bind. And more importantly, it's a word that's kind of still used in kind of the equestrian realm. So when you shod a horse, you're putting a horseshoe, you're actually nailing it on their foot. And so there's a deeper meaning to this word. It's not necessarily just put your shoe on. It's not a slip-on. It's not that. It's a horseshoe. Because that horseshoe is literally bound to your foot and becomes a constant part of you. Just like that horseshoe. You don't take the horseshoes on and off the horse. Can you imagine every day when you go out to the barn and you're like, all right, horse, step into your shoes. You know, and you see the horse step in and then you kind of go. That horseshoe stays a constant part of that horse, right? And so that word shod. So that's what it's telling us. It's telling us that this is a shoe that is meant to stay on. It's not a slip-on, it's a horseshoe. It's meant to stay on your feet so that you can be ready in case, because the day he's saying there's going to be days that are hard, right? And so if you've ever had toddlers, or maybe you have toddlers around, you understand right now the value of that phrase. Keep your shoes on, right? I can tell you that it's a mystery of life. There's some mysteries of life that you just have to ask God when you get to heaven. And one of them is the 2-year-old can't put her own shoes on. And yet, in 0.5 seconds, she can get them off. And so they can't get dressed themselves, but you dress them and then you literally turn around and they're naked. And you're like, you can't put, like if I said to you, go put your clothes on, you wouldn't be able to do it. And I have one grandbaby, little Marley, and everyone has one. She's our naked child. She just doesn't like clothes. So you can put her shoes and her clothes on, and you can just snap your finger, and you turn around, and she's like that big. She's standing there naked. And so I had both girls, I have 2 granddaughters and then 2 new grandbaby boys, but my girls are just over 2 and just under 2, Betsy, Marley, and I had them both at my house this weekend. And it was hilarious because I think I put shoes on like 50 times because I put their shoes on and then they go, no, go outside. And I go, okay, where's your shoes? And inevitably, Marley, always, 100% of the time, would not have her shoes on, and probably we wouldn't know where they were, and we needed to find her clothes. And so we would, okay, put your shoes on, and we go outside, we come back in, and then a few minutes later, Nana, outside, and I'm like, okay, put your shoes on. Keep your shoes on. There's way more playtime if we can go outside. And so the second lesson that we can learn from children about the gospel shoes is keep them on. So feet are important. Keep your shoes on. It's a really great lesson. And Paul is saying, shod your feet, bind this covering, this protective covering over your feet. They're important, and keep them on so that you are ready and you can stand. Now, the next part of this says, with your feet fitted or shod, with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Okay, so theologians sometimes have a hard time with this passage because sometimes they want to say, shod your feet with the peace of God. But that's not actually what this passage is saying. It's saying, shod your feet with the readiness that comes from something. So it is actually the readiness that is the shoe. The readiness is the shoe. The readiness is the covering of your feet. So I got a really great, and sometimes that's a hard thing to get your head around, but let me help you. So I got another grandbaby story. So, of course I do. So this weekend, or this past weekend, I had my little Betsy come up. Now, Betsy doesn't live by us. She's about an hour and a half away. And, COVID has kept us apart. And last year, she was a little too little to really enjoy the beach. But over the last, couple months, I've been saying, when you come to Nana's house, we're going to go to the ocean. At Nana's house, we're going to go to the ocean because Nana lives by the ocean. And so she comes, and we get up in the morning, and it's like 7 o'clock, and I get her all ready, and we head down to the ocean. It's just before 8 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know about you guys, but did you see the surf this past weekend? It was huge. And we get there at high tide. And so we're coming down the steps there at Carlsbad. You can come, there's a little set of steps you can come down, and you see this little kind of picture of these waves. And they are crashing right on the shore. And they could be kind of scary, especially if you're 2 and you're not really used to being at the beach a lot. And so we hit those stairs, and I got her, I'm carrying her, and you can feel that squeeze that they do a little bit when they're not comfortable. And so I start walking down the stairs, and I say to her, Mija, when we get down to the sand, Nana's going to hold your hand, and we don't have to go. We don't have to go in the water. We're just going to put our feet in the sand, and Nana's got you. Nana's got your hand. We're going to be okay. So we walk down. I can still feel her little grip, and at some point we get to the bottom of right by the sand, and she looks up and she goes, Nana, I know afraid. And I said, really? Okay, I know afraid. And I said, okay, well then let's do this. So we go down, we put our stuff down, and I said, let's walk out to where, you know how you do when you got a little, she's 2, so the water comes just out and you're standing right there, just holding her hand. And I said to her, hey, you wanna, let's follow the water out a little bit, and then do you wanna get your feet wet a little bit? So she says, okay, no afraid. And so we walk out, and I go, okay, we're going to get ready for the wave. It's going to crash, and then when the water comes out, you need to hold my hand. So she's got this death grip on my hand, and we're planted. We're ready. I said, ready? She said, ready? And so we stand there, and this wave comes, and it just splashes, and right before it gets to us, I look at her, and I go, run! And so we turn around, and we just run! And her little toes get a little wet, and then she looks at me, she goes, more ready. And I said, okay, let's do it again. So we did it like 5,000 times. I was so sore. Her last name is Morrison, so we call her Betsy Moore Morrison, because she's always like, more ready, more spin me. She's that kid, right? So more ready, Nana. And it was hilarious because as we did it and she grew comfortable, we were going further and further out. And pretty soon we are out. She is getting wet. I mean, we are running. I'm having to pick her up by one arm as she's swinging, but here's the deal. She's 2. There's no way she could have done that. You would never let a 2-year-old stand in front of those giant crashing waves. I mean, that's silly. That's dangerous. But she could do that because she was anchored to me, right? She was able to do something she wasn't able to do. She was able to stand in a very dangerous place because she was anchored to me. And not only that, she was ready. We would make ourselves ready, but her readiness was because she had a belief system that I could take care of her. Because she knows her Nana, the woman that says, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. Betsy, be careful, be careful. She knows Nana is going to punch that wave out if it hurts you, right? And so she had 100% confidence, not that she was able, but that I was able. And she had a belief system that told her that even in the face of this giant wave that was crashing, and honestly, in a physical sense, could take her out, she was not afraid, and she was ready. So what do you learn from that? That you can have a belief system that makes you ready. But that readiness can come from several different things, right? So what you believe creates a belief system that determines how you respond to the physical circumstances in your life. And remember, the enemy's going to use your physical circumstances as a battleground for spiritual warfare. So what you believe determines how you act in a particular physical circumstance. So what Ephesians 6 is saying, that you should shod your feet with readiness. So put readiness on. Be ready. So put a mindset on. So that readiness is preparedness or state of mind, or a mindset, establishment of a firm foundation, right? A mindset. Put readiness on, but it's a particular readiness. It's not just be ready. Okay, I'm ready. It's be in a state of readiness that comes from something very particular. And here it says, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. So a state of mind that results from being anchored and being centered in the truth of the gospel of peace. Now I got to tell you, you can have some other gospels, and they will give you a mindset. You can have a gospel of lack, And you can be centered in a gospel of lack. I'll never have enough. I'll never have enough. I'll always be struggling. I'll always be struggling. And you will have a mindset that is a gospel of lack. So guess what? When there's an opportunity to give, when there's an opportunity to be generous, when there's an opportunity to partner in kingdom things, you have a gospel of lack. You're not going to be able to do it. You can have a gospel of fear. The world is a dangerous place. The world is a dangerous place. The world is a dangerous place. And when someone calls you to go to a dangerous place, to do a rescue, to go to Cambodia, to whatever you are, you're not going to be able to respond because why? The world is a dangerous place. And so depending on where you're centered or where you're anchored, you have to be very careful. I can tend to, in my younger years, I had a mindset that said, you talk too much, you talk too much, you talk too much, you talk too much, you talk too much. Therefore, when opportunities came where I knew I needed to stand up and say something, I stayed silent because I had a belief system that was limiting what I could do in the kingdom. It was a limited belief system because I was created to be a voice. I was created to be the one that goes, I got to say something. And nobody likes to be that kid. But I am that kid. But the enemy knew because he used my physical circumstances, be one of 32 cousins and the one that can't stop talking. And what are you going to hear your whole life? Stop talking. Stop talking. Stop talking. And the enemy can use your physical circumstances to take ground in your life, but that was ground that the Lord intended for me always to stand on. Because I am the one that's supposed to say something. So this particular pair of shoes, because I got to tell you, the shoes you wear are important. And this is what we learned from Betsy, right? She was anchored to something that gave her a belief system that allowed her to stand in front of a giant wave and run through water and get wet, right? The shoes you wear are important. How many of you have ever been to the place where Cinderella lives? And seen someone walking around with, a couple kids, and they're in heels. And you're going, you woke up in the morning, and you knew you were going to be here all day, and you chose to wear. That doesn't actually sound like it. So it can be really distracting. Right? If you have the wrong pair of shoes on, it can be really distracting. How many of you have ever worn the wrong pair of shoes somewhere and your feet are overflowing out of the shoe, right? You're like, I'm going to have marks on me for at least 7 days, right? All the kids are raising their hand too. And someone might be talking to you and you're like, I can't hear a word you say because my feet hurt. I used to travel a lot for business, and I got to tell you, there were days when you'll never want to stay in a hotel because it's transparency time. There were days I would go back in the room and get the ice bucket and fill it up with ice and get my feet in, And so, yeah, they do that. People do that. Put the bag in that ice bucket. Oh, I was in hotels 26 weeks of my life. You want to put the bag in that ice bucket. Let me tell you, don't drink from that glass. Take the comforter off. But anyways, all of that said, that's another sermon. But the shoes you wear are important. The shoes you wear are important. So your feet are important, right? Keep them on. And you got to be in the right shoes. You got to be in the right shoes that are centered and anchored in the right thing. Because we got a mission. So let's talk about the right thing. This is called the gospel of peace. This type of readiness that Paul is talking about, that we should be constant, that should be our mindset, is coming from something called the gospel of peace. So let me read to you Colossians 1. Let's do verse 19 through 21. And it says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and you were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So basically, synopsis, you and God were at war. You were enemies with him because of the way you behaved, but Christ came in and said, I got this covered, and he in his body paid for everything you've ever done wrong, made peace with God, and now you stand before God holy, blameless, and free from any accusation. Nobody can touch you. The enemy is defeated. You are not something he can defeat. Period. And I have to tell you something. You can't mess that up. If you have given your life to Jesus, you can't mess that up. That is a 100% guarantee. If you have had Jesus step in between and bring you and God into a reconciled relationship, that is yours. So you have peace with God. And to anchor yourself and center yourself in that truth every single day, remind yourself, I'm at peace with God today. There's a defeated enemy out there, and he's trying to take some land from me, but I'm at peace with God today. God's got me. God's my defender. God's my provider. God will never leave me or forsake me. I can't mess that up. I am at peace with God. So, where's my mission, as Paul would say? And so what Paul is saying is that the shoes that we're supposed to be wearing is the mindset that comes from living a life that is centered on that truth. We get centered on a lot of truths. We're supposed to be centered on that truth. We're at peace with God. That becomes your center of gravity. So I don't know if you've played any sports. You know how they say you got to center yourself. You got to stabilize yourself. This is what you're doing. This is your core. This is your center of gravity, which is the gospel of peace. And it's going to produce in you this covering, this protective covering that is going to make you both stable and mobile. Because we might not be feeling real stable right now. And we might not be feeling like we can be really spiritually mobile, right? But we can be spiritually stable because we are anchored in the unwavering peace of Christ. We can be spiritually protected from a defeated enemy. Right? We can be spiritually mobile because not only are we at peace with God, we carry the peace of God. So the peace of God is not something that we stand like this is positionally. It's actually something that we can impart. Think through this. Jesus stood in a boat and imparted peace to the waves and the storm. Jesus walked into a room where there were disciples who were freaking out after his death, and he said, peace be with you. Peace is something that you can impart. And right now, there's a lot of people feeling a lack of peace. I mean, it's been an interesting half a year, and we're feeling a lack of peace. So just know you are at peace with God, and you carry the peace of God. And so we need to be stable, and we need to be mobile. Because here's the deal. Why is this even important in today's time? I was just having a conversation, and actually Tuesday at Sermon Prep, we were talking about, in no other time have we ever, every day, woken up and checked how many people died today. In years past, we might have done that once a year. How many people died today? And yet today we're living in a time where every single day we're probably getting up and we're seeing, hey, this many people died in your city, in your town, in your country, in the world. Over 500 million people have died in the last 6 months just from one thing, COVID. That's just one thing. There's so many others and other reasons, but just that one thing flashes in front of your mind. And I have to tell you, 550,000 people made a decision about their eternity, and then they died. Every single person in this world will make a decision about their eternity. Every single person will. You can decide nothing, but that's still a decision. And so the mission that we're on, because we're peace carriers, the mission that we're on, regardless of what physical circumstance we're living in, every day we need to remind ourselves that we have to go out there and help someone make a decision about their eternity. And if you have relationships, that's the best. That's the best, because if someone will honor you by letting you speak into that decision, It doesn't get any better than that. And you need to thank them for honoring you in that way. Man, you let me speak into, you're going to make a decision about eternity. Can I speak into that? Would you I can't tell you what to decide, but can I speak into that? 550,000 people made a decision about the eternity. And that's something, I'm a bit evangelistic, and that lights a fire in my heart. And this is why, though I do love a good shoe, the shoes of the gospel of peace are my favorite. Because I want to go. I want to talk to people about the decision they're making in their eternity. Like, I don't have time to think about this circumstance or that circumstance. Man, when everything happened and they said church is going to shut down, I went, well, that's an opportunity. What is that going to look like? So how are we still, because Paul, they put him in prison and he went, nice belt. I think I'll write a letter. So when they shut down the church and said we can't have church, we went, all right, well, where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? Let's look around us. Let's use this as an opportunity, because we can speak into people's decision about eternity. We have to stay on mission. We have to stay on mission. Let me read to you Romans. It's chapter 10, verse 14 and 15. It says, How then will they call on him whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? That's all of you. And how shall they preach unless they are sent? Because as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring good tidings and good things. How beautiful are your feet when you walk somewhere and you are saying peace. You are imparting what you carry, the gospel of peace, that you are bringing good things to the places where you are going. I want to encourage you today, put your shoes on. Keep them on. Make sure they are the right shoes that are coming from being centered in the truth of Jesus Christ and what he does for you in your life and bringing peace. And then take what you get from that and walk. And go out into that world and be on mission. Because I can tell you, just like that little kid that walked away in that trash heap with my shoes on, one good pair of shoes can change someone's life. Cinderella had it right. One good pair of shoes can change someone's life. So won't you put them on today? Keep them on. Because we've got things to do. There are no time to waste time. And when we do them, we go, that's what I was created to do.